Hey everybody, Dr. Seigler here, and today I wanted to discuss a little bit about ADHD, attention deficit hyperactive disorder. Now, we know that there can be a lot of maybe food and metabolic things going on. Easily, there's a lot of research to show some kids have problems with things like red dyes. Some people and children have problems with gluten, dairy. There can be a lot of food triggers, a lot of sensitivities. In that sense, because usually when the immune system gets excited, that usually excites the brain by the same aspect. So if everything metabolically is doing okay, well, then we really want to start to think about, well, what are different regions of the brain? How can we evaluate them? And what can we do to maybe help with that coordination between different areas? So some of the first, the 5 areas that I'll really start to think about, the first one is going to be the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. So we start to think of the prefrontal cortex, and it's actually broken into several different areas. Now, the prefrontal cortex, if our attention is a spotlight, then shining that spotlight and maintaining attention and focus on one subject can take a lot of energy. So we want to make sure that this dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, kind of right through here, that's going to be more involved with the working memory. There's also other areas that are involved called the ventromedial prefrontal cortex, and that's going to be kind of in through here. That's going to be involved a lot with decision making and goal orientation as well. So we want to see if that prefrontal cortex is working, left side versus right side, different regions. We also want to look at the parietal lobe, which is going to be back in through here. And that's going to be really a lot of attention orientation. I know we think of the parietal lobe typically as, what do I feel? Is there something cold in my hand? Did they draw an A, or is that a penny? What am I holding? But the parietal lobe is involved with a lot more than just how we feel sensations on our body and inside of our body and things like that. So always really try to look at that parietal lobe. We really want to look at the basal ganglia. The basal ganglia has a lot of different areas involved that it fires to and coordinates. I say think of it like the gas and the brakes. A lot of the basal ganglia says, do this, think this thought, say these words, perform this action, but there's also a lot of brakes. Don't do this, don't run around, don't burst out, don't have these kind of issues going on. So sometimes that brake system, we know dopamine is involved in that. There's also a lot of GABA, and so a lot of the time, sometimes we'll see some neurotransmitters, maybe trouble sending that signal. Can be problematic. And of course, when we think of something like the basal ganglia, that even goes way back into a lot of different areas, which leads me to the next area I really like to evaluate for the brain for a child with ADHD or even an adult is the cerebellum. We think of the cerebellum as balance, right? I can close my eyes, I can touch my finger to my nose. The cerebellum coordinates and balances things like emotions and train of thought, a lot of things, more than just, can we do these party tricks. So you usually will find the cerebellum not working as well, so we'll want to start adding neuroplastic therapies along those lines to get that to coordinate things a lot better. And usually there's also the amygdala is involved, and that's what we think about maybe the emotional involvement. So there can be sometimes some emotional triggers that go into it, and that can go into some other different areas of the brain, but sometimes a lot of the prefrontal cortex can be involved, as well as what we would call the limbic system, as well as some of maybe a little bit of the autonomics. We can touch on that later, but it's important to remember that we want to look at that prefrontal cortex, different regions. We want to look at the parietal lobe, which is going to be very important. We want to look at the basal ganglia, as well as the cerebellum, and look for any emotional involvement, such as the amygdala. All these things can give us an idea on what area of the brain might need a little more tender, loving care, and we can apply neuroplastic therapies there. I hope that helps.